Hi YouTube. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about what it means to argue against a vegan. Namely, so I'm gonna outline something that should be obvious to every decent person and is obvious to every decent person. So here it goes. And I'm going to contrast it against psychopaths. Psychopaths can never understand this. They will never understand. They cannot understand it because they don't have a functioning limbic system, because their orbitofrontal cortex is fucked, because their amygdala is broken, because they are a conscienceless, compassionless, destructive, and evil thing. Okay, so here's what the truth is. And for normal decent people, it is a self-evident truth. I hold that these truths are self-evident. Each individual's experience is valuable. Let me say that again. I hold this truth to be self-evident. Each individual's experience is valuable. Now, to elaborate, it means that all of us are going through an experience and it's meaningful because we're feeling it, and there are joyous, more desirable states, and then there are miserable, less desirable states, and we travel up and down that spectrum as we go through life. And that's meaningful. That entire thing is meaningful, and it's self-evident that it's meaningful. Now, when you have a functioning limbic system, it's also self-evident that it's meaningful for others. The only people who cannot understand this are philosophical solipsists, who are probably psychopathic. Because it's not self-evident to them. And there are going to be some philosophy buffs that are going to say, no, you can't say, but I'm going to actually disregard what you're saying when you say that's not the case, because I hold that truth to be self-evident. And I don't actually respect your point of view because I view it as psychopathic if you actually don't see that. And that is basically, that not basically, that is the truth. It's the basic truth. Here's the thing. When arguing against veganism, which psychopaths often do, they attempt to say the experience of an animal isn't valuable, only the experience of a human is valuable. And if you really drilled them down, you'd always find that only their experience is valuable is what they really mean. They're boiling down. That's what it is. They're just boiling down their moral community. And what I mean by moral community is the meaning of moral community means those that you wish to protect. And so they've boiled it up to human, and that's the thing, is that this is base tribalism. This is exactly what people do when they want to oppress and hurt others, and with free of conscience, free of guilt. So they're boiling down their experience. And ultimately, if you really just look at what a psychopath is, it's someone whose moral community can only include themselves. And that's based on their broken brain. That's based on the brain that is a destructive, evil thing. A psychopath's brain is evil by definition. It has nothing to do with what they've done. It's the human form is a dangerous thing, but it's not dangerous if you have a functioning limbic system. That limbic system is used to have care and concern for other organisms, and create a moral community. Psychopaths are merely someone who has no moral community. They actually don't even really have the strongest self preservation, uh, even because they're willing to their desire to cause suffering and harm is actually greater than their desire to uh, preserve themselves. You can see this represented in the Middle East with suicide bombers, namely, but you can also see it in the West with people like Sean Baker who are willing to destroy their bodies with a terrible carnivore diet that has been demonstrated to massively lower your testosterone, cause diabetes, cardiovascular issues, heart disease, etc., and promote that just to cause the harm to others as well. And when I say I hold those truths to be, or I hold that truth to be self-evident, that each individual's experience is valuable, it's coming from the opposite of a psychopathic lens. It's on the other end of the spectrum, and it's not radical. It's not controversial. This is merely including every organism into my moral community. Now, a lot of people would say that that's complicated, but it's not. It's not actually that complicated. It's really because you have to. They would say it's complicated because you have to. Well, what about predators and animal kingdom? But that's not there. There is a degree of evaluation and and also using good sense. It's like, should we allow a cat to survive by playing with a mouse and killing it and eating it? It's like, well, yeah, there's a point when you can somewhat sort of pull yourself into a non-interference type of state where you're not interfering because it's a necessary part of nature. But if you see, just for example, factory farming, actually, let's not use factory farming because maybe that's triggering for some people. Imagine that you have a sloth, okay? Sloths or a panda or something. Okay, these are the most herbivorous animals on the planet. Maybe a gorilla or something like this. Now, imagine you're keeping it as a pet, and what you're doing is to feed it. You are sort of going into the rainforest. You're trapping tigers, okay? You're trapping as many tigers as you possibly can, and other exotic cats or exotic species, wild everything. Yeah, just think of your favorite animal or something, and what you're doing is you're going to torture that animal and keep it alive for the entire duration of its natural life. All the while you torture it every single day, and then how you're feeding this gorilla is you're grinding up the meat of that animal, and then barely keeping that gorilla alive by feeding it meat and just enough foliage to stay alive. This is there is no greater. I can barely think of any analogy greater to describe an immoral way to feed something than this. And so the further away from that you get, the more moral we're looking. There's a spectrum, and when you consider that, and it really comes down to this. So you take all that information I just said, and then you understand that a human can live a happy, healthy, long life eating an herbivorous diet, you're only eating plants, then it's easy to understand why factory farming, in all of its horror and gore and gruesome, senseless violence, is completely immoral. There's nothing moral about this choice. Should you interfere? Yes. In this case, interference makes sense. And again, it all comes back to holding this truth as self-evident, that the experience of each individual is important and meaningful. The experience of each individual, meaning every animal. And even when if you look into holy books, they talk about how the animals have an experience, etc., and how their lives matter. And so there's really no defense for this except psychopathy. That's the only defense, is I don't have anyone in my moral community. Just perfect nihilism. It's all just matter. None of it is real. And that's how they think. That is psychopathic. If you don't hold that to be a self-evident truth, you're a psychopath. And this is why veganism and psychopathy can't mix so well, because they don't see any experience as meaningful. I'm not even convinced that psychopaths are conscious in the same way that humans are. They really strictly appear to be sadistic, anti-conscious monsters, things more like a thing than a human or an organism or something. I mean, they're organisms, but they're more like a thing. They're not really functioning with a meaningful look at life. They're a dangerous object, and that's exactly what they look at us as. That's exactly how they see any other organism. There's a threat level to it, and it's a thing. And that's why they don't have any quarrels about exploiting, manipulating, hurting, and actually enjoy hurting other things, because they just see it as an object. So this is why veganism and psychopathy don't mix. This is why psychopaths can argue that the experience of the animals doesn't matter. But yeah, that reasoning is completely psychotic and psychopathic. Only a solipsist and a nihilist would argue otherwise. They are self-evident truths, and that is why veganism is true, and psychopathy and psychosis is not. Nothing tastes better than good karma.